Association members and guests. This is Elizabeth Gates, Michigan Reading Association President, and your host this evening. Tonight, we're talking about Public Act 306 of 2016, the third grade reading law in Michigan, and its implications for our educators. On October 6, 2016, Michigan became the 37th state to adopt legislation on third grade reading proficiency. Full implementation of the law began with the 2017-18 school year and will impact this year's first graders who reach third grade in the 2019-20 calendar year. The law requires those students not exempt from the law and who are not scoring proficient on the third grade state summative assessment to be retained. As many of you know, third grade has become an important benchmark as reading instruction changes focus from learning to read to reading to learn. It has been generally accepted that reading proficiency by third grade is the most important predictor of high school graduation and career success. In addition, researchers claim that students who are not proficient by the end of fourth grade are 4 times more likely to not finish high school. So the campaign for third grade reading legislation is sweeping this nation as a call to arms to raise proficiency and reverse the trend of underachievement in our schools and communities. About 39% of Michigan third graders did not meet the proficiency standards for reading in the 2013-14 school year, according to the MEP results. And in 2015, only 50.1% were proficient on MEP's replacement test, called M-STEP, as reported by MDE. While we can all agree that low proficiency in reading is unacceptable, the devil is in the details, as there is much controversy and the retention promotion mandate, as well as issues of resources, funding, and testing reliability issues. Tonight we have a panel with us to talk about this law, and as always, if you are listening to us live, we invite you to join us in the chat room where we will post links to materials related to tonight's program. I'd like to now introduce our panel of experts with us tonight. Please welcome from MDE our invited guest, Lisa Brown, Early Literacy Coaching Consultant, Office of Field Services, and Laurel Trebell, Early Literacy Coaching Consultant, Office of Curriculum and Instruction. Michigan Reading Association Board Member panel guest, Dr. Mark DeShane, Department of Educational Leadership from Central Michigan University, Dr. Sue Ann Sharma, Director of Graduate Literacy Programs, Madonna University, and Dr. Grace Volchansky, Consultant with Macomb Intermediate School District and MRA Legislative Chair. Also a big thank you and welcome to Dr. Troy Hicks, Professor of English and Education and Director of the Chippewa River Writing Project at Central Michigan University. We expressly thank you for producing this webinar. For all of you who have joined our chat room tonight, thank you for our interest. So tonight our first segment is on the overview of the main points of the law. And so I'd like you to welcome Lisa Brown and Laurel Trebell, who is going to give us some more important information about Public Act 306.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Hi.
Thanks so much for having Laurel and I this evening. It's been a pleasure to be able to join you. We've been working really hard to create some guidance and support around this law. And we visited several ISDs, and it's really nice to be able to join on MRA and be able to continue to spread that awareness to the local LEAs so that everyone has kind of a clear understanding and overview of the law, but then also some supports around the main pieces that we know are, sometimes confusing, but can also create a little bit of anxiety too if they're not clear. So essentially, the intent of the law is really to help support moving students forward around literacy. And it starts with the focus on assessment, to inform instruction. And it also focuses on core reading instruction, and then reading interventions, as well as improvement plans, professional learning, and coaching. But essentially, districts will utilize an assessment system and provide that to all K-3 students. And then they will take, for any student that exhibits a reading deficiency, they will use that information to help really put some supports in place for students. And that will be documented in an individualized reading improvement plan. And districts will use this information to guide their professional learning throughout the year and focus on some of the job embedded professional learning around coaching, which has been an identified support within the law. In addition to that, the law really focuses on bringing parents in as partners and helping to provide some tools at home to support. And in our kind of campaign to create some awareness around the law, we've been also sharing some resources that we're hoping that will support. One of those is are the essential instructional practices in early literacy, which provides that research base when you're thinking about supporting with, you know, in addition to your core instruction. So bringing that research in and tying it into what you're doing to support your students. We also have an FAQ, and that's on our website, and we'll post that along with a PowerPoint that we have for this presentation. So one of the components of the law that really has those who read it feeling uncomfortable is the retention aspect. And at the department, we're really trying to focus on what we can do to prevent districts from having to consider retaining students. And so we're focusing on those essential instructional practices in early literacy and the school-wide and center-based essentials, which are focusing on putting good quality systems around literacy, identifying leadership teams, and talking about data. And also we have the essential coaching practices, which we are providing some trainings around the state for district coaches to work in partnership with their ISD coaches around getting those essential instructional practices into implementation. And that's pretty much the gist of the law, kind of, you know, in a nutshell.
All right, anybody want to ask any questions at this point, or we can move into segment 2? Segment 2, we continue with Lisa Brown and Laurel Trudeau as we move into talking about assessment and individual reading improvement plans.
I do have a question. This is Sue Sharma. Laura, Laura and Lisa, is there any consideration being given to, I know you've got the training through the ISDs, but what kind of certification requirements for coaches at a district level are needed?
Yeah, Laurel, do you want to talk a little bit? We're developing a coaching model right now at the state. And we're looking at how we're going to roll that out. But really, the law asks that coaches have literacy knowledge and skills beyond that of a classroom teacher. Mm-hmm. And it points to a few things in the law. And we've been talking about, you know, really trying to help support coaches around the research-based practice in literacy, and then infusing that with the essential coaching practices. We know that some coaches have participated in Coaching 101. Some have participated in cognitive coaching or other coaching trainings as well. We don't have anything at the state right now, like a micro-credential or a coaching certification per se that goes on your teaching certification. But we have done some exploring of micro-credentialing too, so.
What about the BX endorsement?
The BX endorsement?
Yeah, for the reading specialist?
Oh, well, I mean, so are you talking about, and I apologize for my misunderstanding here, but are you talking about the reading specialist? Is that what you said?
Yes. Is that something that the state may look at for coaches that are being hired for these positions? You know, so they have more than just the classroom experience. And I understand the coaching training is one thing, but also that reading specialist training. I guess that's what I'm asking.
Yeah. I think that's a good indicator of having some advanced, knowledge and skills going through that, but we certainly haven't placed that as a requirement for coaches at this point. Laurel, did you have anything that you wanted to add to that?
Well, I think we're at some very very beginning conversations.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, was in a meeting last week, kind of that very beginning conversation on how do we build that piece. And in addition to what a certification might look like, what are some of the trainings that are happening when we have not only the ISD coach trainings and the district trainings, but some of the coaching intensives that we're starting to host with our ISD coaches to grow their coaching practice. Basic conversations about how do we take that learning and how do we acknowledge that that is part of the process they've been through. But they're very beginning conversations at this point.
Thank you.
Laurel, I have a question. I know this summer when I was at ILA, they talked about the standards that they came out with for coaching and that they had two different directions they were going. One was the reading specialist and the other was actually literacy coaching, and they kind of separated the two. Is that something that MDE is going to look at and use as a guide, or is that just a recommendation?
I'm familiar with the work of ILA in those two realms. At this point, I would have to I'd have to get some answers to some of those questions, because some of those pieces don't happen right out of our office. And like I said, we've just started broaching that conversation on what does this look like. I think the coaching model is that beginning step to identify what skills they have and what they should be doing in classrooms when they are coaching teachers, and what that looks like when it's effective. So we're not to that point yet, but I would have to ask, we'd have to kind of do a little digging in another office and see if those conversations have started to come to the surface as far as a certification standpoint.
Thank you.
That makes sense. Thank you. Any other questions on that segment? All right, well, let's continue then with Dr. Grace Velchansky, and she wants to discuss some of those implications for practice using 31A monies and the coordination of MTSS.
Thanks, Beth. And as Lisa mentioned, that the third grade reading law really looks at partnerships. It looks at not just waiting till students are at third grade level to intervene, but really the early intervention piece is so critical. So Troy, if you can bring up the PowerPoint, that would be helpful to do that. And the PowerPoint, I have really, really short. It will also be on the MRA website. So, there we go. So the state has defined who is considered to be at risk under 31A, and this is actually a new part of 31A legislation. And here are those indicators. So they are looking at students who did not meet proficiency on grade 3 ELA state assessment, or they're at risk of not being proficient. And that's determined by the school having a multi-tiered system of support in place. And one that's just not a quasi-MTSS, but really moving toward a strong component. And they're also looking at under 31A proficiency or at risk of not meeting proficiency in grade 8 math. They're also defining students who are chronically absent as defined by CEPI. And just note that economically disadvantaged or EL students are the target population, where in the past it would be any student who would be at risk. So they've kind of narrowed that definition a little bit for districts. And let's see, there we go. And so as we look at MTSS under 31A, what's really been pretty nice about this is they've actually defined what MTSS, a good MTSS, should look like. And there'll be pieces of it that we recognize out of the gate. Districts have it or schools have been doing it, but there's also some pieces that are a little new to it. And so they've really made sure, the legislature made sure that it complies with third grade reading law. So there's not going to be any misalignment under that. And they really want us to use resources to address those early literacy components that need to be in place. And that at MTSS definitely be in place for a school that operates grades, really kindergarten through 8 is what it ends up being. And the components that the state has identified, again, are nothing new. They aren't pieces that we don't recognize. Try and bring up the next slide here. There we go. So the legislation under 31A states that at least all of the following essential elements have to be in place. Again, a core instruction, critical. And the legislation even allows for a small percentage of funds to be used for professional development in order to make sure that teachers understand multi-tiered system of support, move toward getting that framework in place, and also if they need PD to implement some core instruction. We'll continue to try and intervene as early as possible. Third grade reading has us really look at kindergarten on up, so the earlier we intervene, the better. And that the multi-tiered model of instruction and intervention meet these 3 pieces. Again, that core curriculum is so critical and overlooked at, I think, a lot, and I should say a lot, but oftentimes it's not as strong as it should be. We kind of jump to our intervention pieces. Schools do a nice job with targeted group intervention, an intense individual, but sometimes having those classroom interventions may not be as much in place as we would like them to be. And then the last slide just finishes up again with those components that need to be in place for multi-tiered systems of support. We want some good information to help monitor student progress, inform instruction, and using those that data to make those instructional decisions. The state has identified some of the assessments that schools should be using in order to make sure that students are screened on a regular basis at the beginning of the year, benchmark, etc. And this is a new piece, engaging families and the community. A lot of multi-tiered systems of support as far as the framework goes don't necessarily emphasize the family engagement. This again aligns with the third grade reading law and engaging the family, and also aligns with ESSA under Title I to make sure that we have strong family and community engagement. The next piece has been around as well. We want to implement evidence-based, good instruction and intervention practices, and that the implementation with fidelity is language that we may not have emphasized as much within a multi-tiered system of support. I think we do a lot of good practices, but sometimes the fidelity piece could be missing, and that schools be using that collaborative problem-solving model. I know MDE is looking at a multi-tiered system of support framework, and we'll be making some recommendations down the road, so we can have a nice model and some guidance there.
Grace, I have a question. I'm wondering if you could go back and talk for just a minute about core instruction and maybe kind of talk a little bit more about what does that look like from a coaching standpoint, but what does that look like from a classroom teacher standpoint, and how does that work within the MTSS structure?
Okay. Well, MTS has always had those 3 tiers, and tier 1 always being the core instruction, that piece that is solid in its implementation. Teachers know what they need to teach. They have a scope and sequence to teach from. They have available resources to use in the classroom, and that whatever core is in place really meets the needs of most students in the classroom and allows for classroom teachers to provide small group intervention when needed. The role of the coach could be to help teachers use the resources effectively, understand the components of their core instruction, and then also help model where discrepancy exists within core. And I think the role of a coach could also be to make sure that there is consistency with implementation, not only across grade levels within a school, but sometimes coaches are split. So what might that look at a district level as well? So are we doing what we should be doing with that core? Oftentimes we get a core and we adapt it to whatever we feel is needed in the classroom. And I don't, there's sometimes room for that to happen, but we can oftentimes move so far away from the intent of what the course should look like that we start to use it in ways that looks different across the spectrum. And a good multi-tiered system of support really keeps a handle on what is going on in the classroom for core.
So would you have any suggestions if a school's sitting down and they're doing a data review and they're looking at what's happening, and maybe they don't have 80% at that core curriculum tier. They don't have that first tier. They have their triangle is off, let's say, and they have more going into interventions. What would be something that you would suggest to that school or district?
We absolutely, and I've, as part of my work with schools in implementing Title I and creating school-wide plans, I really emphasize the piece of, if you see and and schools know, they'll be very honest. They go, no, we're not all doing the same thing. So we get down to the nitty-gritty of why. Why is that not happening? And what are you going to do? Because you can intervene for a long time, but you're never going to reach everybody. And it's necessary sometimes to use resources that you didn't anticipate using to get that core in shape, so that we don't continue to have more students in intervention than we do being able to access that core component and move ahead. So PD is a real critical piece, and a good coach will help teachers through modeling, sitting down and having some very honest coaching conversations about practice. So I think it'll require teachers to pull back that curtain a little bit more, and as uncomfortable as it might be, really be open to making some changes and moving towards some practices that they may have not engaged in the past or felt uncomfortable engaging in because they felt their knowledge base wasn't there. So that efficacy piece is eventually going to start to move up that ladder as teachers become more collaborative.
So it sounds like it's a real game changer for teachers as well, and trying to try something new, or at least allowing somebody to come in and help. And that hasn't always been the case in teaching. Sometimes it's a lonely field, even though you're surrounded by a lot of people.
Absolutely, absolutely. And one thing that I heard at the Special Populations Conference last week is they were talking about 31A. That's probably one area which we've had support from MDE in the past on, and there have been transitions within that particular segment of field services. And they've got personnel in place now to help with the implementation, and they're also looking at doing some desk audits down the road. And if districts or if schools are struggling in the development of the multi-tiered system of support, there will be some encouragement and support to help them move in that direction. And if schools basically flat out just, it's not going to happen, or they're kind of dragging their feet on it, the 31A amendment actually indicates that funds could be withheld. So they're pretty serious about making sure that we move in that direction and not necessarily put it on paper only.
Right. They want to see some results.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I know one of the things that Michigan Reading Association is doing this year, we have a committee right now for literacy coaching as, you know, a network of coaches across the state who are tackling this work and may need coaching themselves, or a problem-solving group. And right now there's a Facebook page that's out there that might be helpful, you know, for resources and some help also as a networking community. So something to think about. Does anybody else have any questions for Grace? All right, I want to move on then and introduce Dr. Mark DeShane, who is going to talk about differentiated instruction and some implications for the Michigan Reading Association. So welcome, Dr. Mark DeShane.
Thank you. When Beth asked me to assume the role of administrative chair, I looked at this as a wonderful experience because here at Central Michigan, I train people to be both district and building level administrators. We also work with people to become higher education administrators, but I primarily work with the K-12 part of our program. And one of the things that I'm hearing from a lot of our pre-service and actually in-service administrator candidates is, what does this all mean? And I say to folks, you know, from my perspective, this is probably the best time that we could have the third grade reading initiative in Michigan for a number of reasons. I think we're much better prepared to deal with this initiative than we have on other initiatives in the past. For example, No Child Left Behind, because we have a lot of water under the bridge that we can essentially build upon. And the first one is the reason why I think we're ready is because of No Child Left Behind. No Child Left Behind really moved us in the direction of making solid instructional decisions based on assessment and evaluation of content. It made us look at how our instruction was impacting student achievement in a way that we have had lip service. But one of the things that really forced, I think, this to become real for a lot of people is the sanctions that resulted in being a non-performing, low-performing school program instructor, educational leader. And whether you like No Child Left Behind or not, that's really not the issue. The fact is, it led us down a path towards rigor and implementation with fidelity in a way that I think has been helpful to move us forward. And that's one of the things I stress with our pre-service administrators. You now have a better mindset on the part of frontline staff that people are meaning business, all right? The other thing that Dr. Velchansky just talked about that I really think is a huge positive is the fact that we've had the multi-tiered systems of supports in place for as long as we've had. MTSS is a program that at least most educators know about. From my perspective, most of the people that I work with on the university end are not only understanding MTSS, but supporting MTSS. Those who are not are struggling with some internal issues within their districts, within their regions. But the nice thing is there's an awful lot of information out there that had we not had MTSS going these many years, I don't think we'd be as prepared to help differentiate support. MTSS, when it first came out, really got people thinking about the need for teaching and instruction to be differentiated so that we can support individual educational and learning needs of all of the students in our programs. The third issue that I think is really helpful is the MSTEP program. The MSTEP focused on curricular alignment and our need to implement strategies with fidelity. Again, I like the fact that Grace preceded me because this whole idea of implementation with fidelity is huge. There is a study that was done in 2010, I believe, and it was presented at the Association of Literacy Educators. And it talks about how and why teachers adapt their literacy instruction. And a couple of the lines here that I found really interesting is that teachers adapt their instruction in a variety of ways and for a variety of reasons, which is great. But the findings of Parsons, Davis, Scales, Williams, and Keir said that teacher adaptations might not be as thoughtful as the researchers had previously suggested. They look at the ways that teachers implemented adjustments to their instruction, and they found that they weren't as purposeful as folks had first thought. And I think this idea of implementing with fidelity is vital from an educational support and leadership perspective if we're going to truly be able to do what I think this law is asking us to do. M-STEP focused on the curricular need to implement strategies. Like I said, we also focused on the need for both solid formative and summative evaluation probes in school settings so that we can get a better understanding of trends, not just for individuals, but for groups of students, for your MTSS groups, for your grades, whatever. Fourth, we've had this increased focus on differentiated instruction. The nice thing about differentiated instruction from my perspective is it's holding everybody accountable to the same goals and objectives. But what differentiated instruction does more than anything else is it provides insight into the ways that instruction and student work can be developed based upon common standards to tailor instruction to meet the individual learning needs of all the students. That's one of the things I really focus on when I talk to my pre-service and in-service administrators is how do you make sure that there is implementation with fidelity when you're doing your teacher evaluations? How do you talk about things like making sure that everyone is getting the instruction they need to move things forward? And we'll talk a little bit about that when we talk about challenges. Another thing, and this might sound kind of counterproductive, but I find it to be a huge positive, is Michigan is kind of coming to this third grade reading impetus late to the game. We have other states that have been doing this far longer than we have, and we have the ability to learn from not only their wonderful movements forward, but also to look at and essentially to do an instructional autopsy to see why things fell down and went boom when they didn't work in their programs. Having the opportunity to look at someone else's lack of achievement or improvement, I think gives us a lot of insight as to maybe some of the things that we might not want to try in the future. A big piece that I am really happy to say, and this should make our two guests from MDE very happy. From my perspective, MDE is coming to this thing from a position of strength. The support and the development of the tremendous resources through MAISA and the Glenn initiatives for early literacy, I think are absolutely incredible. They're very, very helpful. For those of you who are not familiar with the Glenn resources, I will put them in the chat box for you to pull them up. They're phenomenal. If you get a chance to go to the trainings, please do. They're thoughtful, they're well thought out, they're done with a cohort perspective in mind. They're training communities of learners, not just individuals, to support what's going on in their programs. Finally, I think supports to our classrooms because of a lot of these initiatives are becoming much more research-based. We are making good, solid instructional decisions based on what we know as far as what constitutes good differentiated instruction, supporting students where they're at, moving them forward, appropriate materials and methodology selection, assistive technology, things like that. Our interventions are becoming much more efficacious. Love that word, but we still have a long way to go. The thing that gets me really excited is we know a little bit more about good quality instruction, but we don't know enough about all aspects of good quality instruction because there are just so many variables out there that we need to attend to. And I think as administrators and educational leaders, we need to help start moving that discussion forward through things like good formative assessment, maybe looking at things like having our own kinds of mini research studies and moving our voice forward so that we can move the understanding of what good solid instruction looks like. Some of the challenges, we need to tell our story better. I think educators are doing a wonderful job in a lot of situations under some very difficult circumstances. I don't think that we have figured out a way to fully tell our story in a way that makes sense. I think we can provide better insights into what's actually going on, both positive and negative, talk about our strengths as well as our areas of need, and the realities of our classroom, if we utilize digital curation and Web 2.0 tools a little bit more fully. We have some powerful support tools based on internet-based kinds of things, and I really think that that could be a huge move forward in putting our voice into the room. Second, we need instructional leaders to demand our instructors implement our interventions with fidelity. Being a teacher is a very difficult job. Being an educational leader is a very difficult job. We need to figure out a way to figure out how we can support our instructional leaders and our administrators so that they can support their frontline staff, so that things like the how and why teachers adapt their literacy instruction can be figured out at a local level. We need to really look at theory into practice a little bit better. Instructional leaders and frontline staff need to feel more comfortable with the existing research supports that exist. We need to have better understandings and feelings of comfort dealing with CEPI, the Michigan Center for Educational Performance and Information. Frontline staff and educational leaders need to feel comfortable going into the ERIC research archives. ERIC is a federal initiative called the Educational Resources Information Center. There's a wealth of knowledge out there. We need to get a better handle on what some of the things that have occurred in the past that have actually worked and try to start implementing them in our programs. We need to feel a little bit more comfortable, frontline administrators and staff, with more empirical kinds of things. Utilization of Google Scholar would be a great opportunity for people to get their feet wet. And finally, the federal government, through the Institute for Education Sciences, IES, has a wealth of information out there about what has happened as far as interventions in educational settings throughout the years. Couple more and then I'll open it up to questions. We need to support our educational leaders and our frontline instructional staff through the utilization of coaches, consultants, and teacher leaders. Throwing people at a problem is not the best solution. Having people go in ways that they know what they're doing to support instructional units and cultural systems, instructional cultures of programs and buildings is vital. We need to figure out a way to bring people into the fold so that they understand the realities of that system, so that they can provide enough emotional, intellectual, empirical support to move instruction forward. We need to get more interactions with frontline staff and school administrators, with psychometricians and research methodologists. We need to feel more comfortable with the data-based, information-based, knowledge-based systems that we need to have. We need to continue to support our students with disabilities, especially in light of the recent Andrew F. Supreme Court decision, which is placing a lot more emphasis on initial placement of students in the general ed setting. And finally, we need to create and utilize processes that incorporate robust knowledge management structures and to provide opportunities for reflective and recursive thinking for both individuals and organizations. Basically, we need to build into our schedules thought time. We need to think critically about what is going on in our programs with individuals, with groups, so that we can put into place interventions that make sense. That's probably going to require us to rethink how we do instructional day, instructional year, professional development, utilization of technologies for supports. But based on where we're at with all of the supports and resources, I'm really encouraged that we are in the right spot at the right time to move a lot of these things forward.
Wow, lots to think about. It reminds me, Mark, of a line that I heard at the end of last year, that sometimes we're just too busy chasing the cows to build the fence. Mm-hmm. And I think that kind of sums up some of your points.
Yeah, one of the things I used to say when I was a building level administrator, and I say to my students all the time, is the immediate gets in the way of the important. Being an educational leader is very, very difficult to be 15 places at once. And that's why I really think that we need to figure out how are we going to utilize people like teacher leaders. We have a teacher leader program here at Central that has basically gone on hiatus because there doesn't seem to be a desire in the field to incorporate a teacher leadership structure. However, when you look outside of the state, teacher leaders are utilized all over the place. Coaches, I think, are going to be an incredibly important support piece. I mean, you know that from what you're doing in your limited role, in Greenville. The other piece that I really think that we need to figure out is the parent piece. How do we get good parent educational support programs in place? We might even want to consider bringing parents in for professional development activities with our staff and create communities of learners and supports and create schools as community resource support centers for literacy initiatives. I mean, there are a number of different ways to go, but these all take time, they all take energy, and they all take a willingness on the part of people to meet the needs head on. And unfortunately, when we're dealing with other issues as instructional leaders, we don't always have the time because the immediate gets in the way of the important. So,
Mark, go ahead.
I was just going to say, the importance of having instructional leaders, but I think we also, I just want to put out there that instructional leaders come with advanced degrees. And one of the things I see missing in all of this is we talk about trainings, but bottom line is we've got to still address that advanced degree piece.
I agree, and that's why I think people should come to Central Michigan and get a Doctor of Education in Educational Leadership. We also have educational specialists in educational leadership. We have a wonderful reading and literacy piece, technology. Yeah, but so I think your point's very well taken. And it may not necessarily be advanced degrees all the time, but we certainly need to figure out a way to make sense of the professional development and get advanced training in place. We have an awful lot of responsibility that I don't think the folks outside of education recognize or realize. And that's where it comes back to telling our own story. If there are some professional development needs in your program, the best way to get the supports I found is to let people know what your supports are or are needed, and to actually demonstrate and document why you need that level.
And Mark, to follow up with your comment about teacher leadership, I know our ISD, we've been doing a teacher leader program for the last 11 years, actually, and we're going to be moving toward expanding that program and applying to MDE to see if that program would qualify for teachers to earn the advanced teaching certificate. So we're hoping that next year we can possibly roll this out. I know Kent ISD has received that approval, and MDE is encouraging ISDs to think outside of the box and form partnerships with universities in order to make that happen as well.
Well, I think you and I need to get together when we're in Traverse City and talk about that, because we would love to help. Seriously.
The other available professional development that I think is some of the best I've ever had would be the writing project. And I went through Central Michigan University, Chippewa, yes, which I would say was the best of the writing programs, but they are all over the state. And if you want to get that intensive, understanding the pedagogy of writing and workshop model, I think that's the route to go too. So changed the way that I approached teaching, a 180. So I would absolutely recommend that as something to think about too.
Can I jump in here, Beth? Because
sure.
I see Brandy would like me to say, what's the one thing MDE could do to support my litany of suggestions? Just continue to be responsive. MDE has done some wonderful listening tours. I was a part of a couple of them earlier in the year when they were talking about what needs to be done in the area of certification. There's a partnership that I think that is going on between the field and the state that is really exciting and supportive. So, Brandy, if people elect me king and I had, all of the power,
kings usually are not elected. However,
just keep doing what you're doing and be responsive, because Michigan is an area that has an awful lot of need We have pockets of strong need, but we also have pockets of strong brilliance. And what we are, I think, attempting to do in MRA through a lot of our initiatives and this webinar is to figure out a way to get those two ends together and create a circle of support.
I do want to circle back around really quickly and back to Sue Sharma for a minute. And when she mentioned, that people going into these leadership roles need to have, some higher learning and some higher degrees. And I think the worst thing that we can do is put people in positions where they can make effective change and they don't have either the resources or the ability or the knowledge or the professional development to support them. And so I just wanted to put that out there and say, I really agree with what Sue is saying, that we don't want to put people in these positions where they're going to fail and they have all of this expectation on them. So and some of that learning is, I think, a personal responsibility, but I think it's also part of the district to help nurture and grow these leaders as we go. So at this point, I kind of want to go through each of the panelists and ask them, what is one takeaway? What is, one last thing that you want to give to our audience? And I want to start back with Lisa and Laurel, who began our segment. What is one thing that you want to stick with the viewers and future viewers?
Just one thing?
Well, we have
After Mark, I don't know. I feel like I need to up my game here a little.
Oh, you're great.
I think, just continuing to have conversations and keep the student achievement at the forefront and doing what's best for kids, looking at the whole child. But having conversations and reaching out to us at the department when you do have questions so that we can help you work through some of those wonderings that you have around the law. Like I mentioned, that big messaging piece, we're just trying to really create a common understanding and lower that anxiety level and keep moving forward as a state to support with literacy achievement in partnership. So
Lisa, can I ask, would we be able to post your email on the website? So if people do have wonderings, is there some place that they can easily contact? If there are people that are listening right now and they want to, ask you questions later, could you give us a link to either you or somebody that they could reach out to?
Laurel and I are always available, and we also have a common MDE early literacy inbox that we can give, and then those questions will get kicked out to the appropriate people. Our focus is really on that coaching supports, but we do support with all things third grade reading law
all things literacy
and early literacy. So we are happy to help in any way that we can, and we can't thank the viewers enough. We know that they're a big part of getting the message out to the districts as well. So
thank you. Laurel.
I guess to kind of go on with what Lisa said, there's a lot of collaboration happening right now. Mark mentioned all of the work that is on the GELN website, all of the practices, the coaching practices, the essentials. All of those documents are a huge piece. It's exciting to see. I'm actually in Detroit this week. Lisa will be joining me, I think, on Wednesday, and we have 365 district coaches who are attending and learning more about those essentials, the coaching essentials as well as the K-3 essentials. But I think in all of the things we have going on, I would mirror what Lisa said, reaching out. There's a lot of a concern around compliance of the third grade reading legislation, but we also know that there's a lot more. It goes a lot deeper than what the law calls out, and that we need to really have a commitment to literacy to improve achievement for students in the state, and making sure that we're continuing to move in that direction and not getting hung up on those compliance pieces that sometimes can sidetrack us from what's best for kids and what we need to be doing.
Thank you. Grace.
Yes.
Any final thoughts for us?
Yeah, sorry about that. You know, I think it's exciting that we have a professional organization such as MRA, we have MDE, we have university partnerships, and that we continue to actually nurture those and collaborate with each other, do things. This webinar has really been a great start to that, and knowing, as Lisa said, that we can reach a broader audience is so important. So I'm excited about the partnerships that we can develop, centering around literacy, whether it be at the early grades or all the way through adulthood.
Right. Thank you, Grace. Sue Sharma.
Well, and I have to say ditto to that, and the partnerships, and that not only that, but that we are archiving things for people to go back and look at and take some time to really reflect on and think, what does this mean for me, my practice, my school, my district, and even whatever capacity you may be serving in. I think even all of us on the panel will be reflecting tonight and think about ways that in our own individual roles that we can help support teachers with this new legislation, help support parents, and communities as a whole with it. So I think it's a great start, and definitely planted seeds for thinking about ways to support teachers in their professionalism. Thank you.
Mark, any final thoughts?
Well, first of all, I want to thank all the educators for what you do on a daily basis. It's a tough job. It's a very difficult job, but it's probably the best job in the world. A good mentor of mine, Dr. Tom Howard, said, don't get too excited on the good days and don't get too down on the bad days. Continue to work and support in your spheres of influence and bringing your peers and your colleagues in your arena forward, because when they get stronger, we all get stronger. And then who ultimately wins are the kids and the communities in Michigan. So again, thank you for everything that you do. It's a wonderful organization for you to be a part of, Michigan Reading Association. The reason I stick around is just because of the quality of the content, the interactions, the networking is absolutely phenomenal. So make sure you reach out and become very active in your local chapters.
Thank you. Well, I'd just like to end the night by thanking all of our guests and our panelists and all of our viewers for joining us and having this discussion and giving us a lot to think about, but also giving us some avenues and ways that we can go out and solve the problem. And if we can't solve the problem, we have some connections now that we know how to reach out and collaborate. And so I think that my takeaway tonight is that we might not have the answers on our own, but together, collectively, we're going to get closer. So with that, I'd like to thank you all tonight. I'd like to give one last thanks to Dr. Troy Hicks for putting this webinar on and being the man behind the camera. Appreciate all of the work that you all do, and I appreciate you taking the time to be with us tonight. Thank you so much.